your life. You are responsible for your life. So what is your vision? What is your life's purpose? Why are you here on earth? What turns you on? What turns you off? Many individuals go through life without realizing their destination. It is very much like you get into a car this morning and start driving around and round and round and have no idea where you're headed. What do you call that person? A lost person. You see, so when I'm talking about leadership, I'm talking about some of the fundamental basic principles of how to enrich our lives individually and with our families. And in doing so, like a butterfly effect, collectively will elevate the prosperity of all people on earth and promote peace throughout the universe, starting with each of us being a good leader of our own personal life. So with that understanding of leadership, I'll give you some background regarding Vietnam, the land where I was born. Vietnam has almost 5,000 years of history. It was a monarchy until the French came along and colonized it in the 1500s or so. One thing about the Vietnamese people, we are very tenacious. From a very small piece of land, directly south of China, we were constantly dominated by China. But throughout 5,000 years, the Chinese government always tried to turn Vietnam into one of their provinces and fell. If you go talk to the Chinese students, they are still being taught by the Chinese educational system that Vietnam is one of their provinces, like Taiwan. Okay. So, because of that resilience, the Vietnamese people were and still is very resistant to foreign domination or influence. So when the French came, the French dominated Vietnam for over 100 years. The Chinese dominated Vietnam for over 1,000 years. And never once those two big giant countries had peace, because they were always had to fight and put out rebellions from the Vietnamese people. Okay. So as the country transitioned from monarchy to something new, the people were mostly not educated, at least not in the Western way. The Chinese Confucian's teaching and the Chinese education dominated Vietnam's educational system. So transitioning from a 5,000 years of history, dominated mostly by Chinese culture and Chinese education, some people from Vietnam at the time wanted for us to transition into a Western democracy. Some people wanted to keep Vietnam the way it was. And some people wanted to seize the opportunity and turn it into a communist country. Ho Chi Minh was a leader of that movement. Several other patriots who wanted to turn Vietnam into a republic. We refer to that group as a nationalist, and we'll refer to the communist group, the Ho Chi Minh group, as the communist. But the communist group never revealed itself as communist in the beginning. They hid under different labels, but mostly independence and freedom for the people of Vietnam. And they collaborated with the nationalist movements, which were more numerous at the time, and they pretended to be a movement of patriots fighting for the independence and the liberty of Vietnam. So the nationalist leaders came together with Ho Chi Minh into one big coalition called Viet Minh. And their goal was to defeat the French, And the French was defeated, particularly after World War II. And then the Japanese came over, and then the Japanese was defeated by the United States in World War II. Okay. At that time, there was a huge crisis because the king of Vietnam, King Bao Dai, the last king, decided that he had enough of all these mess. So he resigned. He gave up his throne. And he said, well, I'm going to create a new government and let this government take over. So he created this new government, but the government was so weak and drastically being influenced and manipulated by the Viet Minh group, led by Ho Chi Minh at the time. So that government was dissolved. And then the French came back. The French decided to come back, and they wanted Vietnam under their control again. It was a French colony. So Ho Chi Minh basically decided to wage war against the French. The nationalist group wanted a peace treaty. Ho Chi Minh pretended to work with the nationalist group to create a national front, and in the process, he planned and plotted the murder of 4 key nationalist leaders, political leaders. Okay, the nationalist organizations, political organizations, lost their leadership, and then those organizations merged together with Viet Minh, all under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh. As a result, Ho Chi Minh became the leader of Vietnam, and he declared Vietnam an independent country. And during a huge meeting of a labor union, Ho Chi Minh and his comrades basically created banners with slogans and so forth at the height of the protest of the labor union in Vietnam at the time in Hanoi. They popped into some of the higher places and opened up the banner and basically turned the entire labor union protest into a protest for the independence of Vietnam. Okay. So they took advantage of a labor union protest and turned it into a political event. And from that point on, the Vietnamese people and United States and other countries around the world looked up to Ho Chi Minh as the leader of the movement for independence of Vietnam. But some leaders of a nationalist group refused to give up. So they worked with Australia, the United States, even French, to unite their effort. Ultimately, to avoid war, they agreed in a Geneva Treaty to divide the country into North and South. The South would be the Republic of Vietnam. It's the first test, the first experiment, if you will, of a democratic republic political system in the southern part of Vietnam. The North Vietnam would become the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, run by Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese Communist Party. Okay? So that took place in 1954. So the two countries were divided, just like North Korea and South Korea right now. Okay? Two independent countries. And both signed the agreement not to attack one another, not to invade one another. But the North violated the Geneva Treaty and decided to wage war against the South. To make a long story short, the United States and the free world decided to come in to preserve the South, the Republic of Vietnam, and the communist world, China and Soviet Union and Cuba, decided to back the North. So at the time, the media in America would tout it as a civil war. It wasn't really a civil war. It was a global war, okay? But it really was a proxy war. Proxy between the communists and those who believe in democracy, and they just decided to fight it out in the land called Vietnam, so the Vietnamese people endured some of the biggest loss of lives in the history of our nation of over 5,000 years. When the United States decided to get involved, the United States wanted to put in only supplies and training and advice. And the initial president of the Republic of Vietnam insisted that the United States assistance would be limited at that level. Logistical supplies, weapons, and training, military training. But over the years, the United States wanted to get further and further involved. It got to a point that under President JFK, the relationship between some of the national security advisors under the Kennedy administration gotten so bad with the president of South Vietnam that they wouldn't even talk to each other. So there was a plan to assassinate, to basically put a coup of the president of Vietnam, a duly elected president of Vietnam. The coup succeeded, and as an outcome of the coup, the president and his brother were murdered. And that took place, I believe, on November 3rd, 1963. A few months later, President Kennedy was assassinated. You see, it was a very, very divisive time. The United States decided to get involved in a land that has 5,000 years history without fully understanding the history of that people, and really did not have a plan, did not have a destination. So the first law of leadership I'd like to share with you is the law of navigation. A leader is responsible to navigate the people that you lead through difficulties, through barriers, and toward the destination. And the first criteria is the leader has to know what that destination looked like. United States did not know what that destination looked like. The United States decided after President LBJ, and then Nixon, and then, Kennedy, Nixon, and then LBJ, 250,000 Marines and Army soldiers landed in the coast of Da Nang, where my father was born. And President Nguyen, who was murdered, was exactly right, because the Vietnamese people did not have a great education. Okay? So the communists utilized that lack of education and spread very effective propaganda. Look, the Americans are taking over your country, like the French did. But the American was there to help. Okay? But the propaganda worked, and worked very well. Okay? So the Vietnamese people created and stirred by communistic propaganda, began guerrilla fights against the Americans. It all a result of the American leadership in Washington, D.C., did not fully understand the law of navigation. You cannot reach a destination unless you know what destination you're trying to get to. The United States just reacted to the political dynamics and to the various dynamics around the world and decided to pour troops into the country of Vietnam without thinking of the consequences. So the first law I want to share with you is the law of navigation. Know where you want to lead your family, yourself, your city, your restaurant, your business. Know where. Define that destination first. What does that look like? And how to get there. Define that path. What are the obstacles? What are uncontrollable factors that may happen? Prepare for the worst case scenario. If you are experiencing good times right now, don't fall asleep. Plan for the worst, because it will happen. That's the law of navigation. The United States did not fully understand the law of navigation. Therefore, it got involved into a war that killed over 58,000 American soldiers and millions of Vietnamese. And in the end, what do we have?
North Vietnam itself
became communist. It happened anyway. You see? So when Saigon fell 47 years ago, on April 30th, 2022, it will be the 47th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. The Vietnamese in America, we refer to the month of April as Black April. I can't really describe to you, but if you look at the images that you saw when Kabul, Afghanistan fell, it was like that. If you look at the images of bombardments in Ukraine right now, in the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, it was like that. I was 8 years old. When Saigon fell, my father was a president of a farmer's bank in a coastal town. The communists despise educated people. They despise people who are self-made. They despise people who can think for themselves, intellects. So the first thing they did was to round up all the educated people. If you were a teacher, a professor, you had a college degree, if you were a lawyer, a banker, a financier, whatever, if you have some level of education, they're going to round you up. And they send you into prison. They call it re-educational camp. They took away my family's home, property, everything. When my father was dragged away for re-education, I was 8 years old. My mother just gave birth to my youngest brother 2 months ago. We became homeless. My mother was a homemaker. So my family fell into utter starvation. But that just didn't happen to my family. Many other families fell into the same oppression. Those who served with the American military and government, those who served with the Republic of Vietnam government, were also rounded up and sent to prison, so-called re-educational camp. We brothers, there were 7 brothers, including myself and my little sister. My oldest brother at the time was 15 years old. We literally overnight had to learn how to farm, how to fish, how to chop woods, dry them, and sell them. So basically, we learned to live off the land. My mother, thanks to her persistence, kept going back to the newly formed local communist government and begging them to allow us to come back to our house. They finally allow us to come back, but we have to live within one small room because the rest was turned into a police station. And we had to pay rent. So my father was away in prison. We didn't know where he was. So imagine the anxiety that we suffered. We didn't know where my father was. We did not know how we were going to eat. Not next day, today. What are we going to have for breakfast? I remember walking barefooted on asphalt road. It's an irony that as a county commissioner, one of my specialties is to build asphalt roads. Walk barefooted for over 20 miles every day to go to school. We'll wake up at 4:30 in the morning, go to mass, and start walking at 5:30. Barefooted. It's hot in Vietnam. As hot as the summer of Texas, if not worse. Highly humid, without anything to eat. And I remember coming home, there was a little bowl that my mother left for me, and I opened up, it was half of a sweet potato. And part of it was already rotten. That was lunch. Not just today, every day. And someday, we didn't even have that. That was the situation. My brother, second brother, Father Hoa, he is a priest now at Holy Family Catholic Church in Fort Worth. He decided to become a day laborer, and he would go do whatever people with land would ask him to do. And they would pay him a little bit of money, and then they would feed him lunch and dinner. I remember my brother, and I would tear up every time. He would pack his lunch in a piece, like a scarf. And he would save it. He wouldn't eat it. Take it home for his little brothers and sisters. You see, everything rises and falls on leadership. Everything. United States is the leader of the world. Morally, ethically, financially, militarily. When the United States fell in its leadership, the world suffers. And you are seeing it right now. It's playing out again and again and again. So if you want Kennedale to prosper, elect the right leader. If you want Tarrant County to be effective, elect the right leader. The ones who truly understand the principles of leadership. I really believe one of the most terrible crises that we are facing in our country right now and around the world is we have leaders who don't know how to lead, and we have followers who don't care to follow. But you see, leadership starts with you and me. We are the one that elect the next mayor. We are the one that elected the next commissioner, the next president, the next congressman. So we deserve the government that we have because we are the bosses of this society, of our political system. Mm-hmm. If you are the owner of your business, but you never show up to manage your employees, and they don't work, and they loot your bank account, whose fault is it? So leadership starts with each of us. Take ownership of our community, our family, our school, our country, and our world. What happened in Russia affects us. Don't think that they are so far away, it doesn't matter. My oldest son is now in Romania. He was born here as an American. So, is what happening in Eastern Europe affect me and my family? Heck yes. It affects us. When my family suffered the lack of nutrition, the lack of food, the lack of freedom, the lack of everything, we couldn't even worship our God, Jesus Christ. They arrested all the priests. And the bishop cannot recruit young seminarians and train them to become priests. And if they wanted to, they have to have permission from the government. So in 1978, my father came home. And I remember my father told me that we will come to America. And he planned, but he failed. He was arrested again in 1978. And he spent 3 more years in prison in 1981. But you see, my father knows the law of navigation. He knew that our future is not Vietnam. Because had we stayed, us 7 boys, his sons, would be enlisted in the Communist Army and go fight in Laos, and Cambodia, and Thailand, and places like that. So he knew the law of navigation said the destination is America. So either way, we're going to die. So might as well take our chances. And that's what he did. He planned, he learned the weather forecast. He learned how to look to read the star, the astronomy. Remember, he was a banker. He learned how to navigate in the ocean at night. And he knew there were a large group of pirates from Thailand. They always roamed within the Gulf of Thailand to rob and rape refugees. So he made sure that in his navigation, he took the longer route around the Gulf of Thailand. Instead of going straight into Thailand, he went around the Gulf of Thailand and landed in Malaysia instead. The law of navigation, my father understood the law of navigation. He knew the future of his children would be in America. He planned, he understood the risk, and he led us, not only our family, but 81 other people, on a small, tiny, little fishing boat. We were sardined into this vessel. It took 10 days on the ocean, Pacific Ocean. Each day, we had 3 spoons, tablespoons of water, mixed in with oil, diesel, and salt water. I remember one time, we were so desperate. My father looked around, looked up the sky, and he talked to the boat pilot. And they were whispering to each other, and they turned around, they started to order all the young men to be fed. So they fed the young men. And they gave all the young men whatever containers that they could find in the boat and be prepared for the storm. The storm came, and all the young men were doing their best to scoop the water outside the boat. I was under the holding with the rest of the people. I could hear the boat cracking. Okay, a wooden boat. I could hear the boat cracking. And I was doing my Hail Mary. It was done. We were done. If you go home tonight, go to the backyard and pick a dry leaf and pour your tub water, your bathtub water on it. Maximize the pressure. And you see that leaf started to waver and bounce around. And that was us at the time. I was so tired throughout the night and I passed out, fell asleep. Because personally, I was ready. But I woke up and I saw some sunlight. So I climbed up to the deck. And I gazed a little bit further away and I saw very cloudy series of land and island. And I started to yell and scream at the top of my lungs, land, land, land. And then everybody climbed up and started to yell, land, land, land. It took us another 2 days to be able to reach the beach of Terengganu. Terengganu is a city in Malaysia. My father made sure that everybody got off of the boat safely. He stayed behind with a few other young men, and they destroyed the boat. They destroyed the boat. So that nobody could force them, could force us back into the ocean. So my question for you is, this is our home. If our country is destroyed, where would you go? If you have fear, if you have complacency, if you have whatever issues you are facing, how would you deal with it? What would happen to this country if America is no more? What would happen to this world if America is no more? You say, well, Andy, it's such a hyperbole. No. Afghanistan, Ukraine, Vietnam, these things happen. Countries of 5,000 years fell because of leadership. Don't take what we have in this country for granted. It is not an accident that we are able to enjoy what we have. It is as a result of the sacrifices through hard work, blood, and tears, and divine intervention that we have what we have. And that is a responsibility for being a leader. America is the leader of the world. So we have to go all in to protect what we have. Not just politically, for one party over. No, that's not what I'm talking about. There are principles that are true universally. 1,000 years ago it's true, 1,000 years later it's true. That's what I call the objective truth. We need to seek the objective truth and understand that through leadership, the law of navigation is critical. Another principle of leadership is trust. The foundation of leadership is trust. Do we trust each other? Do American people trust each other right now? You see, my dear friends, I'm sharing with you just a little bit of what my family and I and some of my Vietnamese people have gone through. And you may think, wow, what a great story. No, it's not a story. It really happened. It's not fictional. And it could happen to you. It could happen to us. The Ukrainian never thought it would happen to them. Even when President Biden and a lot of people said, the Russians are going to attack. Guess what? Ukrainians said, nah, Putin wouldn't do that. Right? So, starting today, I ask you to ask yourself, what can you do today, tomorrow, next week, at your level, within your circle of influence, to make a difference. To make sure that what happened to my people in Vietnam, to my homeland in Vietnam, will never happen here. Ask yourself one question. Is America better today than it was 10 years ago? Is it freer today than 10 years ago? Ask yourself that question. And I think you can answer your own question. And by being able to answer those questions, you will have to take responsibility. Because as the leader of our community, as leaders of your family, and as a leader of yourself, you have to take responsibility. We have to take responsibility. And that is how we assure that the future and the prosperity that we are enjoying now will be here for the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Andy?
Yeah, no, trust me, nobody cares. I told you guys, wow, right? Dropped some off. Any questions?
Malaysia was a stopping point. From there to here, was it?
Yeah, I didn't have, it would take at least an hour to do justice to what I had gone through. But Malaysia was a refugee camp. There was a refugee camp called Pulau Bidong. And we spent 4 months there. And then we were sent to another refugee camp in Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia, to learn English. And after that, we were sponsored by my first two brothers who escaped in 1979. They were 30 days in the ocean, no food, no water.
Jeez.
But they finally were saved by I think it's called USS Juno. It's part of the Pacific Fleet, the United States. That's right. And so they moved here first to Kentucky, to Covington, Kentucky, on the other side of the Ohio River from Cincinnati. And so when we came in 1981, I landed in Los Angeles Airport on August 26, 1981. August 26, 1981, the day that I will never forget. So yes, we spent totally about 6 months in Malaysia at a refugee camp. And I'll tell you stories about the refugee camp later. I don't have time right now. Okay.
We'll have a part 2.
Comes back, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see parallels between what's going on in Ukraine and our leadership, quote unquote, in that, we're saying we can't get involved, can't get involved. You have the entire country saying, we've got to do something. And that's kind of how it went then. I was there, I grew up during that time. 2 of my brothers were in Vietnam, one of them was shot. I feel like we're doing this whole thing all over again. We're like in the very beginning when everybody's saying, oh no, you're crazy.
Yeah.
But I see it on the wall.
Well, the Vietnamese people, the South Vietnamese people were capable of fighting against the communists. Okay? We fight it our way, not the American way. We fight it our way, right? And we were successful until the American put troops in. Okay? I don't think we need to put troops. The Ukrainian has more than proven that they are capable of fighting the Russians. They just need weapons. Okay? Guess who supplied the North communists with jets and weapons during the Vietnam War? China and Soviet Union. Guess who supplied the North Korea with weapons and MiGs and so forth? Russia. Were Russia scared of starting World War III? They didn't know, right? So we don't have to put troops in Ukraine, but we got to be able to help the Ukrainian to be able to defend themselves, And the best way to do that is to equip them with weapons. We should have done so 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Like we should be supplying weapons and beefing up the Taiwanese military right now. Not wait until China attacks. Okay? And that's leadership. It's a law of navigation. You got to anticipate problems that haven't happened yet, but you anticipate they will be happening, and plan ahead. The law of navigation.
Any other questions? Judge?
So after the law of navigation, did you have any more just key points that, you know, that we can kind of take and?
Core values for leadership.
Yeah, well, I'm so caught up on what you said.
You affected her so much. She
Yeah,
wants to be- okay.
I'm like an information person, and so, you know, I really love the law of navigation. I think that is an amazing first step. But can you just like give other steps that you may have, just a few little nuggets or something that I can kind of, you know, continue to research on? Or I'll talk to you for some hours. I really love to pick your brain.
There are two other principles that I think very apply to the Vietnam War and its aftermath. Number one is the principle of trust. Every relationship and every leadership, the foundation is trust. In politics nowadays, it's mostly about manipulation. It is not about building trust. And people wonder why we Americans are so damn divided. Well, because we don't focus on building trust. Our leaders say one thing and they do another. What if your pastor tell you to love others, but he cusses people out all the time? You see, the foundation of leadership is trust. If there's no trust, American United States at the time did not trust the Vietnamese to fight their own war. The mistrust got so bad that the CIA collaborated through Henry Cabot Lodge, and some of the South Vietnamese corrupted generals paid them $3 million and assassinated the leader of the Republic of Vietnam, the duly elected. He would be comparable to George Washington. He was the founder of the Republic of Vietnam. After 5,000 years of history, of monarchy, he was the first president of the Republic of Vietnam. Okay. But the United States government expected him and that country to be a mature democracy. How long did it take for us to be at this level? Several hundred years, right? South Vietnam was just a baby, still wearing a diaper, okay? Doesn't know how to walk yet. Don't even know how to flip. I'm talking about democratically, okay? But America, I'm not talking about American people, I'm talking about some people in the government at the time, expected Vietnam to behave like a mature democracy. It was impossible. Like a lot of people right now expecting Ukrainian and President Zelensky to be like a mature democratic nation. It's impossible. It takes time for democracy to grow and become more mature. That's one principle. The second principle is the principle of adding value. The responsibility of a leader is not to add value to himself. The main responsibility is to add value to those he serves. You see? But instead of adding value and help strengthen and empower the Vietnamese people so they can stand on their feet and fight against the communists, yes, it will be a struggle, but we all grow through struggle. If I do everything for you, you will never learn anything, right? If you do everything for your children, you wonder why your children are so soft, entitled, right? So the principle of adding value says that the main responsibility of a leader is to add value to others, to delegate, to empower them, to trust them. Don't micromanage. That's leadership. But the United States at the time did not trust the Vietnamese government. Did not. Yes, the Vietnamese government was corrupted. Yes, of course, like most young democracies. But you got to give it time. You have to nurture. You have to grow leadership. You have to give it some room for mistakes. But the United States never trusted the Vietnamese people and the Vietnamese leadership. And ultimately, the turning point of the war was when President Nguyen was killed. And then there were a series of new presidents that were like cool every other 3 months. okay? Every other 3 months for a long time, for several years, before it settled and became stabilized a little bit. Okay? So the principle of adding value is another principle I want to share with you. I think it's critical that as leader, as parents, we are the leader of family. We have to learn to trust our children, to empower them, to add value to them, to help them understand, to encourage them. Don't belittle them. You know, the same principle apply to a business, to a local government, to the federal government. Why? Because it's a universal principle. It is true everywhere. It doesn't matter what the culture is. It doesn't matter what skin color you are. It doesn't matter whether it's 1,000 years ago or 1,000 years later. It's because it's based on the objective truth. It's based on the objective truth. And I'm a Christian, and I believe that you can find the objective truth in the book of Matthew, where Jesus said, if you want to be first, you have to be last. It's that principle of empowering others, of serving others, not to take, but to give. In our society, we always talk about freedom and liberty, but how often do you hear us talk about responsibility, personal responsibility? We always talk about a go-getter, right? We all like a go-getter. But what about a go-giver? You see, it's the culture that we have built and established over the years that becomes the DNA of our paradigm. If you want to bring our country back to its fundamentals, then you're going to have to focus on principles. Leadership is influence, not manipulation. Leadership is influence. It's convincing, it's persuasion, not oppression. There's a difference. You see, we have to go back to those principles at every level, in the family, in the individual, at church, at school, at city government, at county government, at state government, at federal government. But we don't talk about those principles because it makes us feel uncomfortable, right? Our leaders, elected leaders, one day it's like this, but the next day when the poll come out, they will switch right away because they don't want to lose an election. But then we have soldiers who are willing to give up their lives to fight, to defend this country and our way of life. But our politicians, the commander-in-chief, is not willing to lose an election. You see, that's an oxymoron. How can you build trust? When a leader say one thing and do another, how can the soldiers trust you? How can the American people trust you? And that's, to me, leadership is something that we need to go back to. Real, authentic principles of leadership, which that information is available anywhere. If you go to YouTube, just put in leadership. Read books from John Maxwell, Anthony Robbins, Zig Ziglar. I mean, these people, they talk about leadership principles all the time. Some of that information is all over the library, right? But how many of those books are required reading in our school system? Or is it about transgender or sex or racism and so forth?
Right.
You see? So, leaders are readers, right? So, I really believe that if we want to build a strong Rotary Club of Canada, it takes leadership. And not just Jeff. Everybody has to take responsibility. Okay? So next week, hopefully the number will double. How do you do that? Well, each person bring a friend. And the number will double. It doesn't require a lot. Or if Jeff has to double the size by himself, he has to make 30 phone calls by himself. He may be able to do that once, but asking him to do that every day, it may be difficult. But if each of us take the leadership to invite one person to the next meeting, within a matter of 3 weeks, you will have 75 people attending the meeting. It starts with us.
I'm going to try to outspeed you. I you know, for Rotarians, we have a compass, and just like your father had a compass, and you were just laying out the trust and adding to everything. Our compass is about servitude. So here's our coin. It has our compass in the back, so you always remember.
Awesome.
And then,
I collect these.
and then I know it sounds like your father was the master of navigation leadership. I think you're actually the master of servitude leadership around here, and it's hard for strong leaders to have good mentors because you want to find somebody that's going to enhance and make you better. And I always count you and Matt a mentor of mine. So for me, I got you one. All right, and then there's tickets I see. Go ahead, Maria.